once more than the first. Agatha samshayam bodhi samotaranatavilim vande vichittatapadam chittantam guruparati. A little bit. Then Yasyon me Shanami Shabhyam. Is it too low or too high?
It's fine.
Yasyon me Shanami Shabhyam Jagata Shakti Chakra Vibhava Bhavam Shankaram Suma Yasyo me Shanami Shabhyam Jagata Pranayodayo Tam Shakti Chakra Vibhava I'm coming back to that expression in verse 11, Adhishtatri Bhavena. I think the question was rightly asked, and I found also Swamiji's interpretation. There are two bhavas, that is Adhishtatri and Adhishtheya. So Adhishtatri is the subject, I mean the one who presides, not who presides, who is the perceiver, and Adhishtheya is the one who is perceived. Now the whole difference is precisely in that shift to the pure subject. Pure subject means to the true, one's true own nature, which is akritrima, which is unartificial. And as some other spiritual teacher once said, one has to be the master in one's own house. So Adhishtatri Bhava is that being the master in your own house. And not always being dependent on this and that external influences or influences from others, but being the master in your own house. That is Adhishtatri Bhava. And so Swamiji says, there are two states of perception. One state is Adhishtheya and the other is Adhishtatri. You should perceive this whole world as your own self. Now this is the second stage, that you are the perceiver, you are the master in your own house, which means also that you perceive everything in that light of that akritrima, of that unartificial dharma. And so this is very important. So the one who has attained that Paramampadam, that supreme state, and who is the center, who is residing in the center, who is the pure, unartificial subject. So from that center, he perceives the whole world as of that divine nature, Svabhava, that's Svabhava. But it's all implied, I mean, as it is expressed so briefly. And before also Swamiji, he sometimes expresses it in a more simple language, that the obstacle, when he says ashuddhi, his own impurity. What is the own impurity is simply extroversion. Because the change that comes is always antamukata. And that is it. We have those who have done the Prativijñā Hridayam, it was the same. The moment that transformation takes place, transformation is that from externality to internality, to interiorization, antamukata. And this is what is, the impurity is that externalization, bahyamukha. These two terms, they say it all. Then you will get, this is from Lakshmanju, you will get wonderstruck, you will feel wonder in your nature, you will realize that state of God consciousness which you have not realized in past so many centuries. A question has been raised regarding Kundalini, but I am postponing it because the theme of Kundalini will come. The only point where Kundalini has appeared was in that wonderful quotation from the Kakshya Stotra about that golden pillar, that although his senses move in all directions, but he remains established within like a golden pillar. And that this golden pillar is Kundalini. But we will come to that as the text moves in that direction. Of course, those who have done the Vijnana Bhairava, they know that Kundalini has appeared at the beginning and at the end of Vijnana Bhairava. So it kind of has made an arch from the beginning to the end, and in between, and so many other practices are there. But then it gets again connected to that central experience of the whole spirituality. And now we come to a more philosophical discussion. Now, of course, we have to know that whatever philosophical differences there are and there were among the different schools, they were also all based on experience. So their discussions were not simply, of course there was a lot of logic involved, but here it's all related to experience. How do you interpret this state of this supreme state, or this state of total absorption, and so on. Now, Spanda Kārikā is not a philosophical text, but still it argues in very brief way against three schools, that is the Nayayikas, the Vedanta, and Madhyamika. So the difference, and the main argument is about non-existence, emptiness, but not, he says, abhava, not shunya. So I don't want to go into the philosophical argument because we have practically decided to stick to the Kārikas and to the essential meaning or interpretation without going too much into the philosophical details. Now, verses 12 and 13, they deal with this question. Now, what I said in the introduction, that these schools, they were, it was not a fight, but it was a kind of mutual process of clarification and of even sharpening their tools and understanding better both the opponent and their own experience. And you remember in Shimla, Torella used a beautiful example, that the discussions between these philosophies, it was not like fighting between enemies, but he compared it to the method used in the Asian martial arts. See what happens in these martial arts. They are not just attacking each other, but they are first observing what is the movement of the other, and then they both imitate the good movement, and then they also see the weak points. So then they attack the weak point. But after learning that movement, so that comparison was very good, because they observe each other very well. And they take over whatever positive they can accept into their system. But then they also discover the weak point, and then there they start attacking. So I found this comparison quite useful. Because normally we present it as, these opposing systems, they're totally opposed. They're not totally opposed. They have adapted and adopted so many things from each other.
The intent is positive. The intent is positive.
Uh-huh.
The intention is positive.
Yeah.
To improve upon.
Yes. So here it's a question of abhava, non-existence. And you will notice, the word shunya doesn't come here. Na bhavo bhavitam iti nacha tatra asti amudata yato aviyoga samsparshat tadasit iti nishchaya. Atas tat kritrimam kneyam soshutta padavat sada natu evam smaryamanatvam tatatvam pratipadyate. Mere non-existence cannot be an object of contemplation, nor can it be said that there is no stupefaction in that state. Because on account of the application of backward reference, it is certain that it means the experience of stupefaction was there. Hence, the artificial object of knowledge is always like sound sleep. It is not in this manner, that is as a state of recollection, that the Spanda principle is known. The Spanda is not safe here. Only that principle, that reality is known. Now what he is distinguishing here between the discriminating between a state of akritrima dharma, this unartificial, and kritrima. And of course it's all a question of discrimination of experience, because as we said in the morning, that even in the Yoga Sutra, the state of what externally it seems as a state of absorption, but it can be also a state of stupefaction, as he said. And like the Patanjali says, that Prakriti Laya, those who are they are getting down into the level of Prakriti, and it seems as if they are totally peaceful and totally absorbed and so on, but they are not in that Paramam Padam, this unartificial nature, which is the ideal. So this discrimination is very, very important for any spiritual guide. And that's why the texts have to discriminate. Otherwise, anything looking like, he has attained samadhi and so on, what kind of samadhi? It can be a complete delusion. And that's why the criticism is rather of considering the state of abhava, non-existence, and he doesn't say shunyata, he doesn't say shunya, abhava, considering that as the ultimate experience. And then he goes on arguing against these three schools. And the main point, I'm just only coming to the main point, that he summarizes that whole discussion on page 77 in the translation. So if somebody says that, yes, now from 11 to 12 I have been in deep samadhi, and then somebody asked, what did you experience? Yes, it was emptiness. So how can you remember emptiness? So the question is this, the remembering of a state of emptiness, first of all, is not the state of emptiness. And a remembered state of emptiness becomes something objectified. Anything which you remember, you objectify it. So that's the main point of the criticism. And this is also the danger of many yogis, that then they think very great, yes, I was in a wonderful state of emptiness. But what emptiness? It is, you already remember it, you call it, you define it, you describe it. So that's not emptiness. So he summarizes.
In that sense, how do we know that the state of emptiness exists?
Huh?
How do we know that the state of emptiness exists? If it can't be defined, if it can't be, the experiencer can't tell about it. How do we know that it exists and is not the creation of somebody's fantasy?
I don't.
If you can't talk about it, how do we know it exists? And if we can't talk about it, describe it, objectify it,
Yeah, this is the whole problem. This is the whole problem.
How does the author know that it exists in the first
You see, now let me come to a very simple analysis which I have done along with my teacher Panika. You have an experience. There are 4 stages. And this, I'm going away from the text, this is just a simple analysis. 4 stages. The experience itself. And experience may be very deep, very authentic, whatever it may be. Then you remember the experience. And the memory is already not the experience. And then you describe that experience to somebody else, or you write it down, or whatever. So the description is already the 3rd stage from away from the experience. And then you use a certain language, of course, to describe it. You use a certain the terminology to which you are used from your own tradition. So the same, it may be, we cannot say if it is the same experience or another experience, but you describe it in terms of your own tradition, what you have learned, and so on. And then, of course, the 4th stage, that is then leading back to the experience that, how these texts come about. It becomes a text. And that text, you read it, and you are supposed to come back to that experience, or to some similar experience. So it is you go further and further away from the experience itself. And whatever words you use, whatever description you use, it is based on your background. I mean, language is determined by your culture, your religion, your tradition, etc. And that is the whole problem, this memory, remembering the experience. In which terms do you remember the experience? And this is the whole question which is discussed here. And that's why the moment you identify an experience as an experience of emptiness, then the criticism is rightly applied, that how can you A remembered emptiness is not emptiness.
But it can point the way. But it can point the way.
Yeah,
Language can point the way.
yeah,
Or this text can.
yes.
Or we might just be chasing shadows. The artists.
So that even void, so long as it is conceived, is very knowable. Means it's an object of knowledge because of its being delineated in thought. See, it's like saying, "Oh, I was in a state of nirvikalpa." Well, if that nirvikalpa state would have continued, you couldn't use any words to speak about.
But it's only that when you reach a state of vikalpa.
Yeah. So the same thing will speak about Kundalini. You see, because all this talking about experience is so dangerous, and that's why you need a guru, you need a shastra, you need a very clear guidance. You know what is authentic, what is not authentic, what is akritrima, what is kritrima, what is fabricated. No, there's so many fabricated mystical experiences going around, and that's why these scriptures are very useful and helpful. So then he comes at the end when he summarizes his commentary to this point.
Which page?
The Spanda principle cannot be recollected like the void. That can never be said with propriety to be absent, for it is involved uniformly as the experience in all the experiences. And beautifully here, he quotes, Srimaraja quotes the Upanishad, and one of the most basic, fundamental ancient Upanishads, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. How can you know the knower? How can the knower be an object of knowledge? So this is, of course, you have the Kena Upanishad and the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. How can you know the knower?
Which page?
Page 77 in the translation, and the Sanskrit is on page 73. But I cannot follow the Sanskrit, it would take too much time. Though the state of entry into reality is remembered on account of the impression of prana, etc., when one comes back to normal consciousness after meditation, the Spanda principle is not similarly remembered. It is rather the highest experience, the quintessence of uninterrupted light and bliss involved in all experiences. And that he quotes what comes later, whether it is word or thought or object, there is no state which is not Shiva. Hence, this principle, which is uninterrupted bliss of consciousness, can never be an object of memory or a state of insentiency. And rightly he says, memory can be related to prana, etc. Means to certain experiences which are tangible. Prana experiences connected with prana, they are tangible, so you can recollect. But that actual state of emptiness, that cannot be an object of recollection. And here, I mean, I find the whole dialogue between Buddhism and Hinduism, or we may call it or Shaivism or non-dualism, should be taken up again. And this place is so important for such a discussion. I would love to have it Rinpoche maybe. See, because what the Upanishad says, when you cannot know the knower, it is also a constant denial of objectifying any experience. And if you read the Kena Upanishad, it is totally devastating. I mean, with every sense, you know, the seeing and hearing and so on. Kashmir Shaivism, non-dualistic Kashmir Shaivism, has taken up this point that the ultimate consciousness, which is underlying everything, can never be made an object, neither in thought or in experience or in and so there it comes very close to the emptiness, because and that's why so many practices in the Vijnana Bhairava which lead to emptiness, because you have to empty yourself from all these vikalpas, from all these concepts and ideas. But the misunderstanding is still continuing between these two schools, but I think one should come to a more... Yes.
I'm not meaning to argue because I don't have so much of clarity that what bit we do in Buddhism, emptiness does not mean emptiness literally like nihilism. Empty means empty of inherent existence. And that is the same as Kashmir Shaivism.
No.
Empty of a separate self.
Yeah, you're fully right. I'm just sticking to the text.
Yeah, but when you talk about Buddhism and when they talk about Buddhism again and again, they don't mean nihilism like consciousness.
No. I don't mean that. And
No, even Buddhism doesn't mean that. It's
yeah, I know.
same. So what we study again and again, we told emptiness means empty.
Yeah. No, I am only on the basis of this text where he says that if somebody goes into a deep state of samadhi and afterwards says, I experience emptiness, and that's the whole point here. There's no philosophical, it's not a total philosophical discussion on shunyata and so on. This is not meant. So we leave it at that. And 14, 15. In 15, 16, and as I promised, I'll come up to 17. Avastha yugalam cha atra karya kartritva shaktitam karyata chayini tatra kartritvam punna akshayam karya unmukha prayatnuya kevalam so atra lupyate tasmin lupte viluptosmi iti abudha pratipadyate Nato yo antamukho bhava sarvajñatva gunaspadam tasya lopa kadachit syat anyasya anupalambanat. We are now approaching the definition of who is enlightened, Prabhuta, and who is fully enlightened, Suprabhuta. That will come in verse 17. So this is in preparation of that. Oh, I'm sorry I didn't read Mark's translation. Thank you. Therefore consider that to be an artificial state similar to deep sleep. Oh no, sorry. Yeah, 14. Moreover, two states called the agent and product of action abide here. The product of action is subject to decay, whereas agency is imperishable. Only the effort directed towards the product of action disappears here in states of intense introverted contemplation. When that ceases, the unenlightened believes that his own existence ceases. On the 15. So again, you bracket this Spanda principle, but it's not yet said. In Jaidev Singh's translation. Two states are spoken about. That is of the doer or the subject and the deed or the object. Of these two, the deed or the object is subject to decay, but the doer or the subject is imperishable. In the samadhi of void, only the effort which is directed towards objectivity disappears. It is only a fool who, on the disappearance of that effort, thinks, I have ceased to be. There can never be the disappearance of that inner nature which is the abode of the attribute of omniscience in the event of the non-perception of anything objective. And here it's again, this is the turning point. Natu yo antamuko bhavaha sarvajñatva gunaspadam. What is the basis of omniscience is the state, perfectly introverted state, antamukha bhava. And this can never be, can never disappear. What does he say? No. That inner being is the abode of omniscience and every other divine attribute. It can never cease to exist because nothing else can be perceived outside it. If those who have done Vijnana Bhairava will remember one very important verse where he says that grahya grahaka samviti, that the consciousness of subject and object is common to all living beings, but the difference of the yogi is that he is aware of their connection, of their relation, sambandhes savadhanata. He is fully aware of the connection. So this is here, that these are the two states are subject and object. And the difference of the yogi is that he is aware of their connection. And here, the yogi is of course one who is in that inner internalized consciousness, antamukha bhava, which is the substratum, the basis for omniscience. And this basis on this internalized being, that can never disappear. Anupalanganat. So he discusses the different states in deep sleep and in these four different states.
Is that what he's referring to when he says in the event of the non-perception of anything objective?
Non-perception?
Of anything objective. What state would that be in when there would be nothing objective to perceive? Deep sleep or death? The last sentence in the translation of 80.
Yeah, deep sleep is one level of interpretation, yes. On account of the non-perception of another, the external effort during deep sleep, etc. etc. means always any state of unconsciousness or lack of external consciousness. How can the cessation of the internal principle be suspected even by blockheads? For how can the disappearance of one thing affect another? Therefore, the description of the non-enlightened Prabhuta is that he thinks that if he enters into a state of void, that he also disappears at the same time. This is the Prabhuta. So he goes through all the possible interpretations, the cessation of him can never be possible, whose nature consists of the inner light of eye consciousness, and who is therefore the abode of omniscience. No one can be found as the perceiver of the cessation of that inward nature. If any such person is found, it is just he who is the inner consciousness. This is an objection. And then I don't know if we should go through all this argumentation about non-perception and state of unconsciousness. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not very good in interpreting this, because either we go totally into the details, or we just let it be at that. So if you don't mind proceeding further, then we reached that very important verse 17. After all these discussions of the different states of awareness, non-awareness, consciousness, unconsciousness, etc., we come to 17. That little introduction by Chimaraj would be helpful. Having discussed how on the cessation of external activities the unenlightened decides about the unjustifiable cessation of the experience or the self, the author now describes how the fully enlightened and the partially enlightened consider the self. Tasya upalabdhi satadam tripat avyabhicharini nityam syat suprabhutasya tada adi ante parasyatu. The fully enlightened has always and incessantly the undeviating knowledge of that. The self is not written there. Tat. In all the three states. The other one means the partially enlightened one, has it only at the beginning and end of each state. Now, this is very important. So, Suprabhuta is mentioned, and the other, the Prabhuta is only called the other, means the one who is enlightened but not fully enlightened. Now, the three states are Jagat, Swapna, Sushupti. the waking, dream, and deep sleep. And the characteristic of the fully enlightened one is that he has continuous awareness in all the three states, including Jagrat, because Sushupti is already qualified to be closer to Samadhi, but Jagrat is more difficult, waking state. Satatam. The Satatam is very, we have to recite it. It's very important because there is also a description of the fully enlightened Satatodita who has a state which is ever arisen. Yes, yes. But it's ever present, but ever arisen. It never goes down. And this is the difference between the Suprabhuta and the Prabhuta. Nityam Syat. Now, Tasya Upalapti, the attainment of that, again, it's not said Spanda or Atma or anything, of that. So what is Tat? And that is, I would connect it to that verse, Paramampadam. See, when that agitation ceases, then he attains the supreme state. And Paramampadam is anyhow neuter, so it is that. On attaining that supreme state, continuously, in all the three states of consciousness. Whereas, and now this is important for us because we may not be fully enlightened, but we may be enlightened. That means those of us who are Prabhuta, they have this experience at the beginning and end. Now what does it mean? If you consider, if you relate it to the three states of waking, dream, and deep sleep, then it refers to that karana in Vijnana Bhairava, where you practice awareness at the time between waking and sleeping. So that's the beginning. And at the end, between sleeping and waking. And Swamiji had the capacity even between Swapna and Sushupti. He said, yes, that's very difficult, he said, but he had it. How to get that point between dreaming and deep sleep, and to be aware at that point. This is really only for highly advanced yogis. But between waking and sleeping, or sleeping and waking, that is what everybody can experience.
Somebody tried it last time, couldn't sleep. I don't know, I don't remember her name. Last time, during the Vijnana Bhairava, when we were doing that, somebody tried doing it, she couldn't sleep whole night.
This is again the same problem. You see, if you try to objectify not the Turiya, but the Sushupti, Sushupti also you cannot control it. Only, to get that moment of entry, before you enter. But of course it's not only, now we'll come to the commentary, it's not only the three states, this is mainly meant, but to be aware at the beginning and at the end, that concerns many dharanas of Vijnana Bhairava. So many other dharanas in Vijnana Bhairava concern the moment, the beginning. And we had spoken about this prescription of intensity. Means that intensity of the beginning of an emotion beginning of a perception, arising of an experience, and not to go out, but to stay with that beginning, and to be aware at that beginning, at that point. And this is the whole secret of that Adi Anta Koti. Now let's come to the commentary. Of course, I have said Tasya refers to Paramampadam, but he says it refers to Swabhava. Tasya means of the real nature, which is the topic of this treatise. Upalapti means uninterrupted knowledge. The fully enlightened has, by the firm grip of the process, described that awareness in all the three states of waking, dream, and deep sleep. The fully enlightened is one who is completely free from even the residual traces of unenlightenment. Nitya means at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. Avyabhicharini means invariable, undeviating. The meaning is the fully enlightened is one whose inner nature always shines as identical with Shiva. Shankara Atmaka Sasvabhavataya Spurati. Since the partially awakened has this awareness of the Spanda principle he put it in bracket, at the beginning and at the end of each state, therefore he is fit to be fully awakened by the instruction regarding Spanda. The author will speak about it in the verse beginning with, therefore one should be on the alert for the discernment of the Spanda principle. This is 21, where the first time the word Spanda occurs in the whole text. And in the unenlightened one remained stupefied as one is in deep sleep, while he who is not enveloped by spiritual darkness abides as the enlightened one. So he connects the different passages in the same Kārikā with this one. Here, for the purpose of enlightening fully the partially enlightened yogi, the instruction is given to fill even the middle state, consisting of the determination of objects with the rapturous experience of the fourth state, just as he fills with that bliss the initial and the final phases of the three states of waking, etc. Now, to fill even the middle state, and here he quotes the Shiva Sutra. There are three Shiva Sutras which he quotes. Seven. Jagat Swapna Sushupta Vede Turiya Bhoga Sambhava. Such a yogi experiences the expansive state of Turiya and the differentiated states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. This is and 320. 320 is that it is a metaphor of the oil spreading on the surface of water. Tailavat Asetyam. 3. 320. Trishu Chaturtam Tailavat Asetyam. It's beautiful. The fourth state, that means Turiya, the transcendental state, must be expanded like oil so that it pervades the other three, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. It's like when you pour oil on a surface of water and slowly it spreads. Not to talk of that oil disaster, it spreads over the whole ocean. Tailavat Asetyam. That means the three states of waking, dream, and deep sleep should be pervaded by the fourth. And that is what, of course, in the later whole literature is called Turiyatita. So Turiyatita state is actually the Suprabhuta state. Because in Turiyatita, this pervasion of all the states by the fourth takes place. The yogi must prolong Turiya in such a way that its nectar becomes established and pervades not only at the beginning and the end, but also in the middle of the three states. So this is a very crucial verse. Now, what we can practice is the beginning and the end. And then the spreading of the Turiya in all the fours, that is also, it's a very, of course, they would say it's a matter of grace, of highly advanced awareness. But the beginning and the end of each state, that can be practiced. The awareness on that can be practiced. The fourth state, Turiya, which is filled with pure knowledge, pure light, and the ecstasy and joy of Turiya, must be sprinkled and expanded just as oil expands when it is poured on a smooth surface like a piece of cloth. But it's also said like on water. The yogi must expand the state of Turiya into the other three states. So I think here again we have reached a point where I wouldn't like to proceed because this is the high point of that whole development. So I think we should stop here. And it's our task, of course, always to try to connect the text with our experience, with our practice. And so this awareness on the beginning and end is something you can do with any practice from the Vijnana Bhairava. And most directly available, as the text says, is that between waking and sleeping. So to be aware at that point, and then the opposite at the end, sleeping and waking. So these are what we can practice.
Or the beginning of a thought, for example.
Hmm?
The beginning of a thought.
Yeah, of course.
The